too. Thank you. There's the recording mic. So let's start over. We're down to the home stretch. No, wait, I was back here more. We're down to the home stretch. Okay. 6 shepherding functions. 6 things that shepherds do, whether you're an elder, Sunday school teacher, or a friend. And I will mention that, not to go into great detail, but Keith said you can tell the story, you don't have to use my name, but I said, can I use your name? It'll be a little more effective. Keith, who you referred to a moment ago, one of the elders with the vision to get the campus ministry started, said that Clinton Brazel and 2 preachers and another man whose name I can't remember, but he was on the board out here. In 1956, the fall of 56, right after we had our first year of camp here, they asked him to take them hunting out here, beyond this mountain, I guess. And he brought his horses out here, kept them in the barn. So those of you that are staying in the barn, that really was the barn. He kept horses in there. They stayed in Pine Cabin. And they went up there, and he said he had been baptized years before, but that was the trip when he really got converted, being with those men. And that's when his heart really changed, and later he was baptized again. He says, you can mention that. Don't go into great detail, but I said, that is a story worth remembering. And that's happened right out here. And I just wonder how many people since that trip in 1956 have been converted out here. And really, you might have been baptized out here, and there were some things that were done to maybe make that final change, the tipping point to decide to become a Christian. But it's also the presence of parents, of a supportive church. There's a whole host of things that can go into a 15-year-old, 25-year-old, or a 55-year-old finally deciding, I'm going to give my life to Christ. 6 shepherding functions. Number 1, providing vision. 1, providing vision. 6 things shepherds do. They provide vision. Vision is your sense of the future, your purpose. What is the purpose of your class? Have you ever asked, why am I teaching this class? What is the purpose for this class? It's the purpose for your group or for your congregation. It's knowing who you are and what you are about. Now, every church has a mission, right? We looked at Matthew 4, 23 and 24 and 5 earlier in the week, where Jesus was out preaching, teaching, and healing. There's a mission. Preach, teach, and minister. The vision is, how are you going to do that? What group are you going to do it to? Because you might be a church of 27 people, and you're in a town of 300 or 400 or 500, and you might have the vision of taking the world for Christ. Okay, but a good place to start might be to try to get 5 children at VBS this summer. So your mission is preach, teach, and minister, but you're going to have a vision that is far narrower. What is it your class can do, or your group can do, your church can do? You might have a very small VBS. By small, I mean 5, 6, 7 children. But that doesn't mean it's not an effective VBS. My first time to the Church of Christ was VBS. My parents sent me. I did not want to go. I fought and I kicked, and my mother and Bill Bowman did everything they can to get me in the car, to close the door, take me to VBS, and I have missed very few VBSs since then. That was 53 years ago. Bill Bowman baptized my mother and my father, my grandmother and my grandfather, my uncle. I don't know if he baptized my great-grandmother or if my grandfather did that, but he's baptized about 6 members of my family. He's like 83 years old and living outside of Dallas today, but I still talk to Bill Bowman regularly, the man who dragged me to VBS. He baptized a number of my family members. When some of the family members years later had various problems in life, guess who they would go to talk to? Bill Bowman. You know, even though we've lived away from him, he has been a constant presence in our lives for over 50 years, for 3 generations of us. You know, that's a good man. That's a good shepherd. Okay, and his vision was small. We're going to get some kids and have VBS. It was so small, we had VBS in somebody's house because there was no church building there yet for that new congregation. We had VBS in someone's kitchen and living room and dining room. And yet they baptized someone or led someone to Christ through that eventually that has included a pretty good sized family. Your vision can be small in the sense that we're 27 members. We're not going to take over the whole world, but we can take our part of it for Christ, or take Christ to our part of it. So number 2, managing crisis. Providing vision. An important part of a shepherd as well is to manage crisis. Crisis is created generally by change. And sometimes, usually I should say, that change is a change that lacks purpose or focus. The people don't understand the reason for the change. And therefore they lack focus, and they have disequilibrium and uncertainty. And that uncertainty makes them feel like life is chaotic. Life is out of control. If my family, if we decide, Cheryl and I decide, which we did, we're going to go to Yellowstone Bible Camp. We climbed in the car about 3:30 Wednesday afternoon last week. And we drove until about 11:30, spent the night. We get up the next morning. We drove for hours to get here. There was no chaos. There was no disequilibrium. There was no panicking. There was nothing like that, because there was definite change. You know, in a matter of a day, we were from the prairie in Kansas to the mountains of Montana. Drastic change. However, there was no disequilibrium, no chaos, no sense of being out of control. You know why? We knew every bit of that change every step of the way. But now, you take someone from behind, put a blindfold over their eyes, tie their hands behind their back, throw them in a trunk, and make that same journey with them, and let them out here at Yellowstone Bible Camp and say, we're at family camp in Montana. How are they going to feel? Scared, panicky, disequilibrium, chaos. Life is out of control. Why? Because they've not been aware at any step of the way where they were going and what they were doing. You bring somebody here where they know where they're going, and they can look out the window, they can see the change, and they understand the reason for it. They can make immense changes. But you blind them, tie them up, throw them in the trunk of a car, and take them across the street, and they can have a heart attack that kills them because they're so scared. So as leaders, we need to be aware that when we make changes, let our members be informed. Let them know what we're wrestling with. Let them know why we're thinking about doing the Lord's Supper before the sermon instead of after, if you've been doing it a certain way for 25 years. Why have you decided to change? You better let the church know well in advance. Inform them. Let them be in on the discussion even. Okay? So if you have to make some kind of a change, that's still a biblical thing. Let them know why you're doing it. Otherwise, you can create disequilibrium, chaos, that sense of unpredictability that makes people panic. And here's the thing. You can be good shepherds, but things can happen beyond your control. You may have been in a setting where a key leader dies. And now all of a sudden there's a vacuum created in the life of that church, in the life of that family. A very stable family, you've probably seen this happen, can become very unstable very, very quickly when the mother dies, when the father dies. And that influence is no longer there. And the other parent can't compensate, hasn't learned how to there's not time to learn how to fill that gap. And it's a critical time in a teenager's life. And they are now chaotic. And they act in desperation out of that chaos. And they bring massive, massive problems into the family because of that. That's nobody's fault. That chaos was caused by something beyond the control of any of the members of the group. The death of a key person within it. What do you do? Okay, we'll talk about that in a moment. But realize we may have to manage crisis. Changes can be done in areas of leadership. Or changes in areas of leadership, direction of the church, or function can cause people to feel threatened by that change. So leaders, as much as is within your power, when you have to bring about change, make sure it is with the full awareness of the members. It may not always be able to be because with their approval, but it may have to be with at least it can be with their awareness. Why would you change the Lord's Supper? Well, there are certain places, like when I preached in Florida, almost a third of our men and women worked in the prison system. There's a massive prison system in northern Florida. The joke is they commit the crimes in the south, they incarcerate them in the north. And that's pretty much true. But some of them were just across the river, and the time change, sometimes the elders there decided to have the Lord's Supper before the sermon. That created disequilibrium for some people who had always had it after. And one woman even moved in, and she called me over to have a very frank discussion with me about how liberal our church is. I said, how do you mean? She said, you have the Lord's Supper before the sermon. In my 70 years, I have never had the Lord's Supper before the sermon. She says, I think the reason we do it is because the elders don't think it's important, and they want to just have it and get it done with and out of the way so they can get on to what they think is really important, like the preaching. I said, oh my, look how misconceptions can happen. Ma'am, it's not that reason at all. We have people that only have a short period of time to worship in the morning before they have to go to work. So we have some singing, and we have the Lord's Supper early in the service, so those people that do have to go to work can at least have the Lord's Supper before they leave. You may not agree with them leaving like that or having to leave, but it's the way it is, and the elders have done this to help those people and encourage them. She said, I never knew that. Well, now you do, and please stop making accusations about people's character and intent that you know nothing of. See, but that's where you drink coffee with people, and sometimes that helps some of those problems. Number 3, stay connected to people. It's always important to be connected to our sheep, but it's especially so during periods of conflict and upheaval. When there is calmness at your church, or rather when there is chaos at your church, that is all the more reason for elders to stay calm. When the church is in chaos, the leaders need to stay calm, differentiated. You are in the midst of the chaos, but you stay calm. And what does that kind of effect does that have on the people around you? It helps them calm down. Have you ever seen one of the leaders when the church is in chaos over something? One of the elders might say, or a key deacon, we've got to do something, and if they don't do something, I'm going to resign, and I know about 20 other people that are as well, and we're just going to leave this place, and that panic just spreads through the whole place, doesn't it? We'll talk more about that in a moment. But what if you have the leader that just says, boy, this is pretty chaotic, there's some wild stuff going on, I'll tell you what, we've got an idea what we're doing, and just stay calm, we're working on this. We're working on this. You notice how police will often do that in a chaotic situation? We can't reveal many details, but we're working on this. How about if you have a major injury, such as my dad had when he was using a table saw. He had a dado blade, and he pushed too hard because he got in a hurry. He was in a hurry. He had a meeting. He said, I got to get this board cut, and the board flipped up, and his hand went in. And he goes to the emergency room. Now, there's two kind of responses the doctor can make. A doctor can come in and say, oh my goodness, I have never seen something like that. I don't know what I'm going to do. And he runs out and vomits. Or the other doctor comes in and says, oh my, will you look at that? I haven't seen one of these in a couple of months. These are so interesting. Mr. Baldwin, we're going to get you fixed up in no time. You just hang in there. No time meant because he was on Coumadin, he had a bandage wrap like this, trying to get that stopped. I go to Bible camp right after that happens, and I'm at Bible camp in Kansas with a surgeon. And I'm telling this surgeon what happened to my dad, and he says, that is so cool. I said, what do you mean it's so cool? The man lost 2 knuckles. They actually took part of this finger and this knuckle and rebuilt this knuckle. And he said, anybody can take out an appendix, but when you get to rebuild a guy's hand, that is what you go to school for. I said, man, if I ever have a major injury, I hope you are on duty when I come in the ER. I want a doctor that comes in and says, so cool, we can do this. Okay? There's a couple of occupations. I know the Bible says to be careful about arrogance, but there's at least 2 occupations where I welcome a degree of arrogance. A surgeon in the ER room, and a professional football quarterback. Right? All 180 pounds of 5'8" Doug Flutie standing on the line, looking at 5 men weighing 300 pounds. And he looks at them, all 5'8", 180 pounds, and he says, "You guys can't get me." It takes a little attitude for that, doesn't it? And guess what? They generally didn't get him. He played until he was 40 years old with no major injuries. He was good. Leaders in a spiritual setting don't need that kind of arrogance, okay? But they do need that calm when they walk into the crisis and say, "We can do this. There's no reason why we have to break up." And you stay calm, and that will have an effect on the others. But if you lose it, wow. I'll never forget a church, not in this state or in Wyoming, but where an elder got caught up in the disequilibrium. He gets up in front of the church, he blasts the church, blames them for the problems they're having, and they hired a preacher that they never should have hired to begin with. Not all the elders are on board for it. A couple just went ahead and had a meeting and hired him. It was done very wrongly. Then when the church couldn't accept him for obvious reasons, he gets up and he blames the church for the failure of the hiring of this preacher and the other problems. And he says, "I'm tired of all of you, and I quit." He quit not just to being an elder, but he quit the church and he walked out the back and never went back. And one of the longtime members there, a man in his 60s, said, "Warren," he said, "I know some things haven't been done right." He says, "and I know it was very, very chaotic and stuff, and I may have contributed to the problem," but he said, "That was my elder. And I picked that man, and I looked to him for help. And he let me down, and he let our whole church down." Even if he didn't know what to do, if he could have just said, "Folks, let's just stay together and work through this." But he trashed me and everybody else in this church, and he walked out on us and blamed us. He said, and that still hurts. Oh, the calming presence of a leader who knows his or her role in this, and they can stay calm. Staying calm is very important when it is connected to staying connected. Stay connected to your people, and they can respect you, and you can help regulate the anxiety of the group. That's an important phrase. Your calmness can help regulate the anxiety of the group. Next is management. Spiritual leadership, shepherding, remember, is relational. You are connected to the people, you're leading the people, and some of that leadership is exercised through managing, through elders' meetings. That's not the only way, also personal contact, but through elders' meetings, through delegation of responsibilities. Leaders need to be able to do that with a degree of skill. Influence. This may be the most important of the 6 functions of a spiritual leader. That is influence. More important than any skill or ability is your influence based on your character. Proverbs 27:23, remember? Know the condition of your flocks. That means you're with them and you have an influence over them because they trust you. John chapter 10, the shepherd knows the sheep, Jesus said, and they listen to your voice because they know you and they trust you. Influence means people trust us and they will follow us as we lead them into spiritual thoughts and behavior. Our influence comes after we have spent time with our members and they have learned that we genuinely care for their welfare and they trust us. I'll never forget watching a guy get on the television set. My brother and I, we were watching TV and a guy gets on and he's selling something and he starts out very intense. And he says, "I just want you to know that I'm concerned about your health and this and this." And he says, "And I want you right now, I invite you to just put your hand, reach out your hand and put it on the top of the TV and feel the warmth of my sincerity." It was hilarious. He came across in that corny kind of way, but in a very humorous kind of way. But he was mimicking what he is demonstrating is the corny kind of approach that some people have. "Oh, of course I care about you. Of course. How come we never see you? You know, how come you have no idea who we are. You don't even know how many children we have, and you're one of our, you're my Sunday school teacher or spiritual leader or whatever." When the people know that we are invested in them and they, if you're at a huge church and you've only got 5 elders, they may not be able to know every family individually and every child in every family by name and your birthdays individually. But they can know your family. And if you have enough elders at a big enough church, they can at least know some churches divide them. And this elder personally interacts with this number intently every month or every so often. This elder with this group, however you do it, know the people in your charge, let them know you know who they are and that your influence will begin to work in their life. Influence means they trust us and that we have a long-term spiritual influence on them, not based on charisma, but on character. And that is so important. Spiritual leaders, great spiritual leaders, really are not born, they're made. There are people that have natural leadership abilities, but you have seen, many of you in here have been in the church long enough, you have seen some of the most gifted young preachers to come out of one of our schools, or maybe not even go to school. But they have a great intellect, they have a great gift of gab, they can spend a very brief period of time in study, and they can come up with this great lesson, but they burn out after 5 or 6 years, right? Why is that? Because they're not developing their inner person. You don't just study 15 minutes for a sermon and say, man, I got a sermon. You study several hours a week because you need to feed your spirit and your soul. And then out of that growth of character, you have something to say. And after you've said it, you've still got something left in there. In other words, you don't pour out everything you have and leave yourself empty. You always have a little more. Because you study, you pray, you visit with the people who build you up. And when you go to preach or to teach or evangelize, whatever your ministry is, once you've poured yourself out, you still have something left in the cup that refreshes you. But some of those that are the most gifted and talented, they can go preach great sermons. And yet, if they do not engage in serious study, if they don't allow someone to mentor them, if they don't place themselves under someone else's influence, if they don't go back to school and get some more Bible training, they will play out and burn out. A lot of what they do is run on their charisma, they run on their personality, they run on their humor. And once that plays out, they've got nothing left to give you. Sometimes they'll get themselves into serious trouble. That's when they start doing things in the congregation that they shouldn't. That's to cover up the deficit that they feel in their own life. So, as a spiritual leader with influence, you don't have to worry about you don't have great charisma. You do not have to worry. You're not running for political office. And once the people know you and they know you care about them, they don't care if you are funny. They don't care if you tell the best stories. They love you because you love them. And the important thing for me to have learned that was very freeing for me is that great leadership is not a matter of charisma, but of function. And if you function as the spiritual leader we've talked about here, you can make major changes in people's lives that the really gifted person will never make because they don't feed themselves and they don't stay around long enough. Influence counts. The goals of shepherding. If you're a shepherd of any kind, family, Bible class, church, here's your goals. Develop community. We have that on the board. Because we're not just converted and then just left out there to be a Christian to wander around in that field on our own. We're placed into a body, the family, the church. So develop community. Develop a spiritual life in people. That's spiritual formation. So when you're mentoring someone, you're spending time over coffee, they might just say something like, I just don't know how to pray. I don't know what to pray. And then you just say, sometimes I don't either. What do you do when you don't know how to pray? I will read a psalm. And the psalm will give me the language of prayer. I'll even read something from Paul's letters. And that will give me the language. For example, if you don't know how to pray and you read, you go to one of the psalms. Okay, honestly, I will more likely go to Proverbs. But I've used the Psalms as well. But say Proverbs 14:2. He whose walk is upright fears the Lord, but he whose ways are devious despises him. There's you a prayer right there. Lord, please help my walk to be upright. And now that opens up all kinds of things. Lord, help me not to cheat on. Lord, help me to be completely honest with. Lord, help me to do the kind of study that the church deserves, that I have to do to be fair to the church that has employed me as their minister. Don't let me cheat on that. Help me to be upright, meaning I do what I'm supposed to do. And Lord, please keep me from being devious. The Bible says that he whose ways are devious, you despise. Lord, I don't want you to despise me. Please don't let me be deceitful. Don't let me be devious. Don't let me deceive my wife, my kids, my church, myself. Please help me to be honest. You see how one little verse can open up a 5 to 10 minute prayer. So you're sitting down with somebody and you're having coffee and they say, I've just been so stressed lately. I don't know what to pray. Say, yeah, that happens to me sometimes. Well, what do you do? Well, I go to a psalm or I go to a proverb. You do what? Well, you go like this. Psalm 75, we give thanks to you, O God. We give thanks for your name is near. Men tell of your wonderful deeds. Men tell of God's what wonderful deeds? Oh, creation, the mountains, the good food that we eat, pizza we'll have tonight, the friends that I have. Boy, Lord, you do a lot of good deeds. Thank you, Lord. And then you go right into a prayer of thanks. That quickly, you can go from having nothing to pray to having more than you can possibly fit into a 2-hour prayer. You sit down with someone, you mentor them in this way, you are developing their spiritual life. Number 3, you develop future leaders to carry on life in the community. The goals of shepherding is to not just lead this body, but to train these young people so that one day they can lead the body. So if you have a high school student that is pretty mature or more mature than a middle schooler, you say, hey, that middle schooler is looking kind of lonely. Why don't you and I take them out for an ice cream to Sonic? So they don't know you're mentoring them. They think together you're mentoring this middle schooler. But what this person is learning is how to care, how to pick out needs, and how to respond to those needs. Even in a very simple way, they're still learning how to do it. And it can be fun. See? So you're preparing future leaders. And you develop and maintain healthy environments. Okay? Remember that Proverbs may well have been issued in its final form during the period of the most chaotic time in Israel's history, the destruction of the southern kingdom. The last vestiges of the people of God destroyed, the communities wiped out, the entire infrastructure destroyed, a family life, spiritual life, the temple, priesthood, gone. So they issue Proverbs because a teenager could think on that proverb and let it shape his life. What you're doing in shepherding is taking that proverb and just chewing on that proverb with them together. I'll close with, very quickly, when disequilibrium occurs. Let's say you have chaos in your church. And this is really another whole talk that we're going to do in 6 minutes, but just so you have them. What happens when you have chaos? There's a change people don't like. Somebody's stirring up trouble, and there's people yah-yahing and murmuring and fighting. Has anybody here seen that? Does it happen in some of your churches? Okay. Here's some responses of leaders, or some of the members. Here's some of the ways people react. The first is reaction. Something has happened. They don't understand it, so people react. Members may be scared, frustrated, angry, or nervous, and they just react. Oh no, what are you doing? And just their excited response of hurt and anger just sends out shock waves of hurt and anger that other people feel, and they respond, yeah, I thought the same thing. And they extend those waves out, and before you know it, there's a whole sea of people going, what's going on? What's going on? Kind of like in the old Western movies, when they're gathered around, in the public square. Do we like this sheriff? No, I don't. Well, I don't either. Well, neither do I. And it goes throughout the whole thing, right? That happens at church too. So, once people react, the next response, number 2, is they tend to cast blame. Cast, C-A-S-T, blame, or blame casting. When that kind of confusion and disequilibrium starts, none of the people who started it stand up and say, hey, wait a minute, I'm sorry, guys, I did this. Hey, way in the back there, calm down. I started this. I'm sorry. I'm going to calm down now myself, and all of you can... No. When they feel disequilibrium, what do? It's your fault. If you hadn't done that, I wouldn't have done this. It's your fault. It's always, and it's usually going to be one of the church leaders. but they're going to blame them for their emotional response. Even if that leader did something wrong, the Bible gives appropriate ways of responding to that person and talking to them. Number 3 is herding. This is herding. Herding up like cattle do. Not herding like, oh, I heard what you said. You hear what I'm saying? Yes, I'm herding you. It's not that kind of herding. It's herding. It's what cattle do when severe weather's coming in, right? They herd up. They protect each other with each other's bodies. Pardon? It's all right. Or they flee. We just had this storm in Kansas, last spring. Keith, how many cattle did we have killed in that? About 70,000 cattle? Western Kansas, northern Oklahoma. A year ago, late May blizzard, we had a church potluck schedule that Sunday. It was Sunday morning. I opened up my garage to look out, and I could not see. I could barely glimpse the church building just a short ways from me, 1 block. And somebody wrote, "Are we having a potluck today or not?" I said, "Probably not." I live at the church building, and I can't see it. I'm not going, and I'm the preacher. So I don't think there'll be a potluck. 70,000 cattle killed, something like that. Most of them drown. What animals will do when they feel something coming in, many times they'll herd up. Okay? And when people feel danger coming, what do? They herd up. When there's something at church or at work or some organization they're in that they don't like what's going on, there's change and they're feeling nervous and anxious, what do? They herd up with people like them. And if this side of the room is for plan A, but this side of the room is for plan B, how did we get so evenly divided? Because we divide ourselves. The plan A people are going to say, "Can you believe they want to do this and that? And our parents have always said, we know this is the best way." And this group is over here saying, "Can you believe that they are so blind that? Can't they see that this is a new..." And before you know it, as you talk to people in the body, you separate yourselves from those that are different from you, and you draw comfort from others who are as equally disturbed as you are at what's taking place. So now if you're the shepherd, you're the elder, and you've got 1 or 2 or 3 different groups pulling apart and fighting among themselves, what do you do with that? People tend to herd up with people who think like them in chaotic situations. The 4th thing is they demand a quick fix. Number 4, when there's disequilibrium or chaos, is we demand a quick fix. The inner turmoil caused by chaos can become unbearable, and sufferers demand immediate remedy. Maybe that's going back to an old practice. Maybe that's putting the Lord's Supper back after the sermon instead of before. Maybe it's firing a staff member or insisting that an elder resign or another leader in the church resign. Okay, so we have this massive chaos of people have herded up, and they're casting blame, and they're bickering at each other. They're not greeting each other at church. You feel nervous. You go into the church building, you feel a pit in your stomach. Your stomach hurts. Your heart sinks because of the fighting that's going on there. And people are pulled off into their separate groups. Okay? And then you can only take that for so long, or you'll start to have serious emotional problems, become physically ill. So when you feel yourself getting that angry and sick, what do? You demand you better do something about this. You better do something. You better fire somebody. You better go back and put the Lord's Supper after the sermon. You better, and it's all what you better do. Even though I'm the one standing up yelling and screaming and gossiping and fighting and herding up and pulling others away and blame casting, I want you to fix my anxiety. I want you to calm my nerves that I have been so immature to let get this far out of control to begin with. And it's your fault. That leads, this demand for a quick fix, to 2 responses on the part of the leaders. When you've had reaction, blame casting, herding, and demand for quick fix, the next 2 steps fall on the backs of the elders, or the classroom teacher, or the boss at work, or the mother and the father and the family, whoever whatever you're in, whatever leadership, whatever community you're in, if you're the leader, here's your 2 responses if you have that kind of chaos. Number 1, you can have a failure of nerve. A failure of nerve. A failure of nerve is when you get caught up in the anxiety. You get caught up in the anxiety of the system. And you now become a part of the chaos. Instead of staying and remaining a calm presence in the midst of the people, but differentiated from them, like the calm surgeon in the ER room when a man is bleeding to death, he says, hey, no problem, we'll take care of this. And he does, or she does. Okay, you can be the leader that's a calm presence like that in the midst of chaos, who brings about a sense of calm over time. Or you can become the kind of leader who gets caught up in the anxiety of the system. That was the elder who got up in front of the church building and blamed all the people out there for his bad decision in hiring a minister that never should have been there. And say, I'm sick of you people. And he gets out of the pulpit. He says, I quit. And he quit the eldership and he quit the members. And he walks off. That is a failure of nerve. When the leader becomes a part of the chaos by giving in to unrealistic demands and participating in chaotic behaviors. When the leader starts reacting, blaming, hurting, or seeking a quick fix, you have now ceased to be a leader. You are part of the problem. And the best thing to do at that point may well be to resign, but not blame the members for it. Just say, whoops, I lost myself, I'm sorry. It's probably best for the church if I don't function as a leader right now. And then when you get things back together in your life, maybe they'll put you back in. Here's the second option for a leader. This would be number 6 if you're numbering 1 through 6. Reaction, number 1. Blame casting, 2. Hurting, 3. Demand for quick fix, 4. The next 2 points, 5 or 6 if you're doing it that way. 5 would be failure of nerve. And 6, the other option for the leader would be remaining a non-anxious presence in the body. Not getting caught up in the fear and the panic and the anger of others, but staying calmly engaged and continuing to function with the aim of helping to regulate the system. And when you remain a calm presence, you can lead the church back to calmness and health. And by the way, those 6 points come from a book called A Failure of Nerve. A Failure of Nerve by Benjamin Friedman, a very good book. And the 6 points about the function of leaders comes from a guy named Israel Galendo on the functions of a church. But that right there has helped me before. It can help in your family, it can help in the Rotary Club, it can help in your place of work, it can help at church if you have chaos going on. These 6 things. And if nothing else, you don't know what else to do, you can at least stay calm. Even if you have to tell yourself, just stay calm. I don't know what to say. They're yelling questions, throwing questions at me left and right in heat and anger. I'll stay calm. If nothing else, I'll just say, that's a good question. I'm going to have to think about that, but I promise I will get back to you. Stay calm. Be the surgeon in the operating room. One of the last times my dad was in the hospital, they were having to put a port in here to treat him with something, and I don't know what's up here, of a major artery or whatever, but it didn't go right, and blood just started shooting out. So the person that was there doing that, I was just sitting there, my eyes just kind of got big. And the guy was just working on Dad, and Dad was kind of out of it. I mean, his health-wise, he wasn't sure what was going on. He knew this wasn't good, but he's kind of not fully aware. But the guy working on Dad just looks back at me and says, would you mind stepping outside for just a moment as we take care of this? He stepped outside, I saw other nurses and stuff rushing in. A little bit later, they said, okay, Mr. Baldwin, you can come back in and see your dad. Stay calm. He allowed me to stay calm. It was only later I realized that because he was on Coumadin, how serious that could have been. You're the ER doctor. People in your group are your patients. Help them. Any questions or comments as we close?
I missed the number 6 function.
The number 6 function would be, you know what? I skipped one. Boy, how's that for shepherding? Provide vision, manage I didn't hear what somebody said. That may be good. Because I might have a disequilibrizing, whatever that word is, reaction. Number one was for the functions of leaders, providing vision, managing crisis, staying connected. This is the one I missed. And that's why when I was numbering in my mind, it didn't work out right. Thank you. Number 4 would be a strong orientation to Scripture. Number 4 would be an orientation to Scripture. That is, we don't do things in the church just because they work. Or we don't do things because the church down the road is doing it. We do it because we're informed by the Bible. So sometimes when somebody at church comes up with an idea, this Israel Galindo says, ask them, what's your theological or what's your biblical orientation? What's your biblical reason for doing it that way? And sometimes people will stop, well, I hadn't thought about that. Sometimes they'll say, well, the church down the road. Is that necessarily a good reason? No. Or you might say, because it works. This other church did it and it got new members. But we've all seen churches that brought in lots and lots of members beyond which the elders and leaders could sit down with them over a cup of coffee and say, let's talk about life. And if you've got all these members, but they're just coming and going, and you don't have time to discipline them, or I should say disciple them and teach them, you may be doing them a disservice. So just bringing in members alone isn't a goal. Are you orienting them to the ways of God? So number 4 would be orientation to Scripture. What's your biblical reason for doing this? And there has to be men and women in the church who know the Bible. Number 5 is management, and number 6 is influence. Does that help? Thank you for catching that. I can't believe I missed it. Because I like that one. Studying the Bible, I like that one. Somebody else? Yes, ma'am.
Well, I like that you mentioned not necessarily waiting for others to correct you, but to have the self-discipline to say, I'm not being a leader right now, I need to go back. And have that reflection because you're publicly orientating yourself into leaders, willing to challenge your own self and realizing your own humanity.
Thank you. And that is hard to do. It's very hard to do. But that is the benefit of community, because one thing, there's a verse in Proverbs, you know the verse that says, as iron sharpens iron, so I'm going to comment on what you said there. As iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another. We tend to use that in the context of, okay, Keith and I are good friends. I don't know if Keith and I have ever been mad at each other. We've been friends for 18 and a half years. Have we ever mad at each other? Oh yeah, there was that time when... But we enjoy doing, we've hunted together, not a whole lot, but a few times. Our families have done stuff together. I've done stuff with his kids, they've done stuff with my kids. We've just been friends for 18 and a half years. And I like to think that we have a good influence on each other. He believes in God and the Bible. He is a studious person. He does great stories at the Lord's Supper table. And my wife always loves it. He gets up, oh good, Keith's doing it today. We've never been mad. Bruce and I, 18 and a half years. Have we ever mad at each other? If we have, I can't remember when either. We've been to camp here together. I've done some stuff with their kids. They were older, so they kind of left before, but they've done stuff with my kids. But I'm picking out the men, but the wives are involved in this as well. I like to think that Bruce and I had that influence on each other, a good influence. There's never been friction between us. As iron sharpens iron, that sharpens through friction. It does not sharpen as a result of niceness. If you could hear the blade of a knife as it is being run over the steel, you know what that blade is saying? You hear shh, shh, shh. You know what that blade is saying? Stop, it hurts, don't, no more. Because that steel is smoothing out the rough edges so that it becomes sharper and is better honed to do the cutting and the work you need it to do. That image, iron sharpens iron, was written in the context of conflict and pain. It's often in the context of conflict that I learn more about myself. Boy, I don't have good self-control. Boy, I get angry more easily than I should. Boy, I can be led to think some mean things against my brothers and sisters on the basis of a disagreement. That's not right. In that context, you have when a man rises, or when a man blesses his neighbors early in the morning, when a man loudly blesses his neighbors early in the morning, it will not be taken as a blessing but as a curse. 4:30 in the morning. How many of us are still sleeping? Most of us. How are you going to feel if your neighbor goes, "Chris, good morning. Hope you have a wonderful day." Where are you, Chris? There you are. Okay. Then he rolls over. He says, "Man, what? 4:30? I still have an hour to sleep before I have to get up. What's he doing that for?" He's not going to roll over to his wife and say, "Boy, we have good neighbors." He may roll over and say, "Did you put the shotgun in the closet or is it still on the side of the bed? We got to deal with this guy." Okay, it's going to be taken as a curse, which what does that mean? That means even though he is acting polite, he has surreptitious intentions, and underneath the surface of his pleasantness, he is a mean guy. Have you ever known somebody that does that? You ever known somebody that complimented you in front of a group, but it was a very underhanded, backstabbing compliment that left you very much squirming? That's that kind of guy in Proverbs 27. Then the next verse says something about the wife who is argumentative is like restraining the wind. Here's a guy that's got a spouse that's argumentative, and he's having a hard time controlling her. In fact, Proverbs says it's like grasping oil or controlling the wind. You can't. But she's very disruptive to her house. The next verse, verse 17, as iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another. In the midst of conflict, of two neighbors not getting along and a husband and wife not getting along, you are sharpened and honed. I think it's the next verse that says, "He who tends to the needs of his master is like one who tends to the fig tree." Meaning you tend to the fig tree or the fruit plant, and over time you'll harvest fruit. You tend to an ungrateful master long enough, and maybe after 30 years of service to that master, he'll look at the slave and say, "You've been a faithful servant for 30 years. Why don't you take the week off?" See, back then you didn't even have to give a day off to your slave. You could kill him in some quarters. But if you faithfully serve even the most ungrateful master, at some point he might say, "You've been a good servant. Have a break. Go take a week off." That's harvesting the fruit. And then the last verse in that section says something as, "Water reflects the face, so the man reflects the man." It's strangely worded. They try to make it easier in the English. But the idea being, I learn about myself from your reaction to me. If I come in here and every morning you start getting rude to me, I might go over to here to Roy and say, "He is rude. I don't know what his problem is." Then you read Proverbs 27, about 13 to 19, and you say, wait a minute. The problem with the rude neighbor at 4:30 in the morning may not be the neighbor. Do you rev your motorcycle engine at 11:30 at night when he's trying to sleep? That may be the reason he greets you at 4:30 in the morning. And are you ever gracious to your wife? Are you ungracious to your wife? Do you fail to recognize her contributions to the home and family? Maybe that's why she often is rude to you, because she's trying to get some response out of you to know that you recognize she's still alive. You may be the problem, not her. And it's in the reflection, the face reflects the face, the man reflects the man, that the iron sharpens iron, and I learn how to become a better neighbor and a better husband. Not in just the nice relationships, but even in the tense ones. So that goes back to your statement, Lindsay. When we're in the midst of conflict, can we recognize that there's at least a chance that we're the cause of it? And Burkina and Faulkner had a book 30 years ago, "The Problem with Us is Me." Remember that book? And that takes some high-level leadership to be able to do that. But thank you. Anybody else? You have blessed my week more than I can say. God bless you all. Thank you.